To oppose the free market economy is basically to oppose that of equal opportunity. Through the mixed economy and via social democracy, you destroy opportunity in the marketplace through your higher tax rates. It destroys so many jobs within the small business sector of the economy.
Argument number 15. We believe in equality of opportunity, not equality of outcome. So do we. In fact, we believe in equality of opportunity the most, while conservatives only believe in equality under the law. If you're born to a poor family, then you don't have the same access to education, healthcare, or jobs that those born wealthy do. In fact, since our schools are mainly funded by property taxes, the quality of your K-12 education is literally contingent on how wealthy your neighborhood is. Conservatives and libertarians claim to believe in equality of opportunity, yet they want to abolish the estate tax, meaning that if you're born to rich parents, then Republicans want to make sure that you start out with even a bigger Head Start. Speaking of Head Start, a program that helps provide low-income children with the resources and education they need to succeed, conservative think tanks and Republican politicians are trying to cut their funding while undermining the public education system in general. So much for equal opportunity.
Meanwhile, it ends up giving monopolies in the hands of giant corporations. And why does it do that? Because that's the natural state of a mixed economy. That's what happens when you bomb businesses with higher tax rates. And then on top of that, you social democrats oppose the idea of deregulation of the economy, because after all, you hear the arguments of social democrats and they will tell you that the banking crisis was caused by deregulation. So what ends up happening, you end up creating that of monopolies. So essentially, you do not support that of equal opportunity, because to support equal opportunity is to support a pro-capitalist system, because there's no system on planet Earth, and proven by recorded history, no system even comes close to the productivity and to the opportunity and employment as that of a free market economy. So essentially, in order to support a mixed economy is to remain in a state of ignorance and support a system that essentially destroys just that. Now, of course, I don't need to go into the argument on monopolies regarding the free market, because monopolies are created by government's intervention, by the very social democrats' policies. We as individualists believe in what we call negative rights. That's what we call equal rights. Now, equal rights means that we all have, as individuals, the right to freely agree to disagree with one another, which is the very reason why healthcare is not a right. For example, let's just say that you called a job a right. What's that saying? It's saying that you're giving the so-called rights to one individual, but you've stripped the employer of their right to disagree. So in other words, you're placing the rights of one group over that of the rights of another group. That's essentially what positive rights do. You don't really stand for equality at all. You oppose equality. You support positive rights because you think healthcare is a right.
Argument number 16. Social programs are a Ponzi scheme. They rely on a diminishing pool of young people to support a growing elderly population. This is a concern for every country with an aging population. This has nothing to do with social programs. Unless, now, I want you to really think about what this argument means. It might sound convincing at first, but really think about it. How does this argument translate to real-world policy? You get it? They're advocating that since we have an aging population, we need to kick the elderly off of programs like Social Security and Medicare that take care of the elderly. The sociopaths have to pay for their tax cuts somehow, even if it means cutting, reforming, privatizing, or even just eliminating these essential programs.
How dare you even call me a sociopath? Your Social Security drove the United States of America more than $21 trillion in debt. You crippled the American people and sent their costs of living through the roof through that of your Social Security. How on earth did you draw to the conclusion that that made the poor better off, or that made the elderly better off? Not only before that of the 1930s, there was no high demand for Social Security. I wonder why it had to be propagated into place in order for people to eventually so-called buy into it. You have basically stolen a lot of their money and given some of it back to them. I wonder how you draw to the conclusion that that somehow made them richer. In the late 19th century of the United States of America, Their healthcare costs were dirt cheap, so was their education costs in a free market, in contrast to today. And they actually had a gold standard. Lo and behold, here we are sitting here with a fiat currency because of the gold standard, because of turning the back on the free market. And how did that turn out for you? See, it's patronising. It's basically saying that if you oppose social security, then apparently you're a sociopath who doesn't care about the poor. Well, that's funny, that is, because the poor were far better off in the late 19th century than they are today with regards to opportunity, with regards to cost of living. Maybe not living standards, because that's an entirely different story. It's only natural that living standards over the course of the past century would continuously improve. But they're certainly not better off with regards to the debt level and the serious crisis that the United States is in today because of social security crippling them in debt. And that has to be paid back someday, and that gets passed off onto future generations. If you were to compare Detroit back in the 1940s to Detroit today, just look at what all your social welfare programs caused. It destroyed their economy, and it's doing the exact same thing to that of Baltimore and California.
Argument number 17. Social democracy inevitably leads to National Socialism or communism. My response to this is, when? Where? How? There are dozens of social democracies, and these countries are generally more democratic than the US. Like, really, think this through. In order for Norway to become communist, the Red Party would have to suddenly sweep the elections, and if they implement communism, assuming it fails, the Norwegian people will just vote them out come next election.
Again, I don't really need to cover on that. I covered it in the video I did on the social democracy. The natural state of social democracy is that, eventually you get these people in demand of getting rid of the private sector because you are faced with these monopolies, etc., and the soaring costs of the private sector. Just take American healthcare as a prime example today. The costs are through the roof, so what are people calling for? They're calling for nationalisation. That's the example.
Argument number 18. The NHS and the VA are failures. Actually, they're not failures, but they have been having problems recently, and these problems are caused by right-wing politicians cutting their budgets. This is the starve the beast strategy. Right-wingers screw over government programs and then blame the programs for their problems. And, by the way, those are socialized healthcare programs, which I'm on board with, but we're not really aiming for those. We're calling for just a single-payer system like Medicare.
Rubbish. I was born and brought up here in Scotland, home to that of the British NHS. The NHS, every single year on record, since 1948, has been faced with massive big long waiting lines and thousands of people left in neglect. Do you know what we were told? We were told that the NHS is available for everyone. That it was available for everyone. Does it sound like leaving thousands in neglect every single year available for everyone? Do you call it available for everyone when someone gets a boob job and is placed first in line ahead of someone dying of cancer, and eventually that person sadly dies of cancer because they were left on a waiting list? Because that happens every single year on the British NHS. If you're trying to tell me that that's working, you're having a laugh. And where's the evidence for that? The Labour Party bailed the NHS out before Margaret Thatcher became the Prime Minister. That's telling you that the NHS was a failure even long before Margaret Thatcher became Prime Minister. Even Margaret Thatcher acknowledged the fact that the NHS was something they needed to get rid of because it was such a failure. It was no different to British Rail. Everything under nationalisation was such a disastrous failure. The Royal Mail went bankrupt because of nationalisation. So it was no surprise why privatisation was eventually brought in. For you to say that the NHS has not been a failure is to say that socialism works. No, it doesn't. Of course, they would set the price ceilings, and that would create shortage problems. You would end up being faced with the shortage of hospital beds, etc. Because the demand of the population is far greater to what's actually available to them. I even had a great uncle who once said that once you reach a certain age, they don't give a about you. In other words, they don't give a damn about you once you reach a certain age, because you're just a number who's eventually going to die off anyway. You're probably taking this from propaganda where they say the NHS is the greatest healthcare system in the world. Oh, it's just so great. It's so great that no other country will emulate it. That's what makes me sit here and laugh at that argument. And whilst the World Health Organization ranked the NHS, the United Kingdom, sitting 18th in the world, here was France, Italy, San Marino, Spain, and Singapore, all with hybrid healthcare markets with strong private sectors, far outperforming the NHS, not just in costs, but of that of the quality of healthcare. Now, America's healthcare system is not a problem with regards to the quality of healthcare. That's never been the problem. The problem of American healthcare, and why it is so neglectful, is the cost of healthcare. And what caused that problem? All of the socialist government interventionism.